These videos are based on real events, experiences, and accounts. However, all names, locations, and identifying details have been deliberately changed to protect the privacy and safety of those involved. Viewer discretion is advised. In the fall of 2023, I was living in Portland, Oregon. I had moved there a year earlier for work, and although I liked the city, my parents still lived nearly 5 hours away in a small coastal town called Crescent Harbor. I tried to visit them whenever I could, usually on weekends, just to break up the routine of work and city life. One Sunday evening, I made a decision that I still regret. I had spent the entire weekend at my parents' house, eating way too much food and relaxing more than I probably should have. By the time Sunday night came around, my mom suggested I stay one more night and drive back Monday morning. It would have been the smart thing to do. But I had an early shift the next day and didn't want to wake up at 4 in the morning just to make the drive. So I told them I'd be fine and left their place around 8:15 p.m. The drive back followed a long stretch of coastal highway that cut through forests, cliffs, and small towns that practically disappeared after sunset. During the day, it was one of the most beautiful roads you could imagine. At night, though, it was a completely different experience. Once you got far enough from the towns, there were long stretches where you wouldn't see another car for miles. No streetlights, barely any houses, and large sections with zero cell service. It always felt a little eerie driving through there at night. Still, I had made the trip dozens of times before, so I didn't think much about it. The first couple hours were normal. I listened to music, drank some coffee from a travel mug, and cruised along the empty highway. The road eventually narrowed into a 2-lane stretch that wound through dense forest, the kind where the trees grow so close together that your headlights barely penetrate the darkness. It was sometime around 10 when the fog began rolling in. Fog isn't unusual along that part of the coast. It can appear quickly and disappear just as fast, but this fog was different. Within a few minutes, visibility dropped from clear road to barely 20 feet ahead of my car. It was like driving into a wall of gray. I slowed down immediately, easing my speed down to around 35 miles per hour. My headlights reflected back at me through the fog, making it even harder to see. The logical thing to do would have been to pull over and wait for it to pass, but there weren't many safe places to stop along that stretch, and I was already halfway home. So I kept driving. The longer I stayed inside the fog, the more disorienting it became. You lose your sense of distance completely. Without landmarks or visible road ahead, it feels like you're crawling through an endless tunnel. Every minute feels longer than it actually is. I tried to stay focused on the center line of the road, following it carefully. After about 30 minutes of slow driving, something appeared in my headlights. At first, it was just a dark shape standing on the shoulder of the road. I assumed it was a sign or maybe a mailbox, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person. A man was standing on the side of the highway. He was tall and wearing dark clothes. He stood perfectly still, facing the road as if he had been waiting for something. I instinctively slowed down even more as I approached him. The last thing I wanted was for him to step into the road while I passed. But he didn't move. He didn't wave for help, he didn't step back, he didn't even turn his head. He just stood there. When my car passed him, my headlights briefly illuminated his face. There was nothing particularly unusual about him from what I could see, just an average-looking guy, maybe in his 30s or 40s. My first thought was that his car must have broken down somewhere nearby, but that didn't make sense. I hadn't seen any vehicles pulled over along the road for miles. Still, I figured it wasn't really my problem and continued driving. The fog remained thick as ever. About 10 minutes later, something strange happened. My headlights revealed another figure standing along the roadside. At first, I assumed it was someone else, but as I got closer, a chill crept down my spine. It was the same man. Same height, same dark clothing, same stiff posture, only this time he was standing on the opposite side of the road. I actually spoke out loud to myself. What the hell? There was absolutely no way he could have gotten ahead of me. I had been the only car on that highway the entire time. No side roads, no shortcuts, nothing. Yet here he was again. I couldn't stop myself from looking directly at him as I drove past. This time, the man turned his head. His eyes locked onto mine through the windshield. The sudden movement made my stomach drop. I looked away instantly and pressed the gas slightly harder, pushing my speed to around 45. The fog was still too thick to drive any faster, but I wanted as much distance between me and that situation as possible. My mind raced with explanations. Maybe it was a different person who just happened to look similar. Maybe I had misjudged where I was on the road. Or perhaps fatigue was starting to mess with my perception. None of those explanations felt convincing. The fog seemed even heavier now, swallowing the road completely. Then, only a few minutes later, my headlights revealed something directly ahead. Someone was standing in the middle of the road. For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the closer my car rolled forward, the more certain I became. There was a person standing directly in the center of the road. I slammed on the brakes, and the car slid slightly before coming to a stop about 15 feet away from him. My headlights illuminated the figure clearly now. It was a man wearing a dark jacket with the hood pulled over his head. Because of the hood and the fog swirling around him, I couldn't see his face at all. He stood completely still, his arms hanging loosely at his sides. The entire road was silent. No wind, no cars, just the quiet hum of my engine and the faint ticking sound of rain hitting the windshield. For a moment, neither of us moved. My heart started beating harder the longer he stood there. "Move," I muttered quietly, even though I knew he couldn't hear me. I flashed my headlights a couple of times, hoping he would react. Nothing. He didn't flinch. He didn't step aside. He didn't even shift his weight. It was like he was waiting. That's when the fear really started creeping in. This wasn't someone asking for help. This was someone blocking the road. I reached for my phone to call someone, but of course there was no signal. The empty bars on the screen felt like a bad joke. The fog outside the car made the world feel even smaller. I glanced at the road behind me, thinking about turning around. Maybe I could reverse far enough to find a place to make a U-turn. I slowly shifted the car into reverse and checked the rearview mirror. The moment I looked back, my chest seized. There was another person behind my car. They were walking slowly toward me through the fog. At first, I couldn't even process what I was seeing. The figure was maybe 20 feet behind the car, moving slowly with deliberate steps. I actually yelled out loud, "Holy shit!" My brain kicked into survival mode instantly. I slammed the gear back into drive and gripped the steering wheel tightly. I was trapped. One person stood in front of me in the road, another was approaching from behind, and I was completely alone on a fog-covered highway in the middle of nowhere. I didn't wait another second. I jerked the wheel to the right and hit the gas, cutting into the opposite lane to drive around the man blocking the road. As my car surged forward, the man didn't move at all. He stayed exactly where he was, his hood still hiding his face. For a brief second, my headlights lit up his chest as I passed him, and then he disappeared into the fog behind me. Relief started to wash over me. I thought I had escaped whatever the hell was going on. Then, something slammed into the back of my car. The impact was violent. The entire vehicle jolted forward and sideways at the same time, and I heard the horrible crunch of metal bending. For a split second, I thought another car had rear-ended me, but there hadn't been any headlights behind me, no engine sounds, nothing. Still, I gripped the wheel and kept driving. I didn't even think about stopping. My mind was racing and my hands were shaking, but I pushed forward through the fog as fast as I safely could. 30 seconds later, I checked my mirrors. There was nothing behind me. No headlights, no cars, no people. The road was completely empty. That made the situation even more terrifying because something had definitely hit my car, and whatever it wasn't there anymore. I drove like that for another 20 minutes, barely breathing. Eventually, the fog started thinning out. The gray wall in front of me slowly faded until I could finally see the road clearly again. Streetlights appeared in the distance as I approached a small interchange that connected to a larger highway. The moment I reached it, I felt the tension leave my body. For the first time since the whole thing started, my brain began trying to process what had happened. And honestly, the only explanation that made sense at the time was exhaustion. I had been driving for hours. The fog had completely destroyed my depth perception. My brain was tired. Maybe I hallucinated those figures. It happens more often than people realize when drivers are fatigued. Maybe there never was anyone on the road at all. Maybe when I swerved to avoid the imaginary person, I accidentally clipped a guardrail or a mile marker. That could explain the loud crash I heard. By the time I reached my apartment in Portland, I had mostly convinced myself that was the answer. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and just sat there for a moment. The quiet of the parking lot felt strange after everything that had happened. Finally, I stepped out of the car. I walked around toward the back to check the damage. The moment I saw it, my stomach dropped. The rear bumper was crushed inward. A massive dent ran almost across the entire width of it. It looked like something heavy had slammed into my car with serious force. I crouched down and examined it more closely. There was no paint transfer. If another vehicle had hit me, there would be scratches or colored paint from the other car. But there was nothing, just the bent metal of my bumper. I stood there staring at it for several minutes. The silence of the parking lot felt a lot less comforting because the damage meant one thing. Something actually struck my car on that road, which meant I hadn't imagined everything. Even now, 2 years later, I still try to rationalize what happened that night. Maybe I really did hit something while trying to avoid those figures. Maybe the fog and exhaustion made my brain fill in details that weren't real. But there's one thing that still bothers me. If I hallucinated the people, what actually hit my car? When I was in college, I worked the night shift at a small roadside motel just outside Flagstaff, Arizona. It wasn't the kind of place people stayed for vacations. It mostly catered to truck drivers, people passing through on long road trips, or travelers who just needed a cheap room for the night before continuing down the highway. The building itself was old, probably built sometime in the 70s, and the neon sign outside buzzed constantly like it was struggling to stay alive. During the day, the place felt normal enough. At night, though, it had a completely different atmosphere. The motel sat nearly a mile away from the nearest gas station, surrounded by empty desert and scattered patches of trees. After midnight, the highway traffic slowed to almost nothing, and the property became unbelievably quiet. Most nights, it was just me at the front desk from 11 p.m. until 7 a.m. The manager lived off-site and trusted me to handle late check-ins, answer the phone, and deal with any problems that came up overnight. Usually, nothing interesting happened. A few tired travelers would come in, grab a key, and disappear into their rooms. Then I'd spend the rest of the shift watching movies on my laptop while waiting for morning. But one night in late October changed the way I think about that job forever. It was around 1:40 in the morning when the bell on the front desk rang. I looked up from my laptop, surprised. We almost never had check-ins that late. A man was standing at the counter. He looked like he had just stepped in from the cold desert air. He wore a heavy dark coat and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. The strange thing was how quietly he had appeared. Normally, the front door made a loud creaking noise when someone opened it. I hadn't heard anything. "Need a room," he said. His voice was calm, almost monotone. "Sure," I replied, sliding the registration form toward him. "Just for the night?" He nodded once. While he filled out the form, I glanced up at the security monitor mounted on the wall behind the desk. The camera outside the office showed the empty parking lot lit by a few dim yellow lights. There was only one vehicle out there, a dark pickup truck parked near the far edge of the lot. I assumed it was his. When he finished the paperwork, he pushed the form back across the counter. I glanced down at it. The name written on the line was David Cole. His handwriting was messy, almost rushed. "Room 12, I said, handing him the key card. He took it without another word. Then he turned and walked out. I watched him on the security monitor as he crossed the parking lot toward the truck. But something immediately caught my attention. He didn't get inside it. Instead, he walked past the truck and disappeared around the corner of the building toward the row of motel rooms. I frowned slightly. That meant the truck might not be his after all. But I didn't think too much about it. Guests parked in random spots all the time. The night returned to its usual quiet. About 20 minutes later, though, something strange happened. The front desk phone rang. I picked it up. Front desk? For a moment, there was only silence. Then a quiet voice spoke. "I think someone is outside my room." It was a woman. Her voice sounded tense, almost shaky. "What room are you in?" I asked. "Room 9. I checked the board behind the desk. Room 9 had been occupied since earlier that evening by a couple traveling through from Nevada. "What's going on?" I asked. "I heard footsteps outside the window," she whispered, "and someone tried the door handle." I sat up straighter in my chair. "Did you see anyone?" "No, but they're still out there." I glanced at the security monitors again. The camera that covered the row of rooms showed the empty walkway. No movement, no one standing near the doors. "Everything looks clear on the cameras," I told her, "but I'll come check it out." "Please," she said quickly. I grabbed the flashlight we kept under the desk and stepped outside. The desert air was cold and still. The parking lot lights hummed quietly above me as I walked toward the row of motel rooms. Room 9 sat near the middle of the building. When I reached it, I knocked gently on the door. "It's the front desk." The door opened just a few inches. A woman peeked out, clearly nervous. "Did you see anyone?" she asked immediately. I shook my head. "No one's out here." She glanced down the walkway, still looking uneasy. "I swear I heard someone right outside the window." Her husband appeared behind her. "You probably heard the wind." But there was no wind, not even the slightest breeze. Still, I did a quick walk around the building just to be sure. Nothing. No people, no footprints in the dusty ground near the windows, no sign that anyone had been lurking around. Eventually, I returned to the office. For the next hour, everything stayed quiet again. Then, around 3:10 a.m., the phone rang a second time. It was the same woman from room 9. This time, she sounded terrified. "He's back," she whispered. "Who?" I asked. "The man from outside the window." A cold feeling crept into my chest. "What do you mean?" "He's just standing there," she said. "Where?" "Looking into the room." I immediately turned toward the security monitors. The camera aimed at the row of rooms flickered slightly as it adjusted to the darkness. And that's when I saw him. A man standing directly outside room 9's window, completely still, just staring inside. I froze for a moment, staring at the monitor. The figure outside room 9 hadn't moved at all. He was tall, wearing dark clothing, the brim of his baseball cap shadowing his face. The window light reflected off the glass, but I could still make out the outline of his body. I grabbed the walkie-talkie we kept for emergencies and quietly contacted the motel manager, even though he lived miles away. "Someone is outside room 9. You might want to call the cops," I whispered, trying not to alert the guests. There was a brief crackle, then silence. I assumed he was asleep and left it at that. I took a deep breath and tried reasoning it out. Maybe it was the same man who had checked in earlier, David Cole. But why would he suddenly be standing outside the window, hours after getting his room key? And why hadn't anyone else on the lot noticed him? I glanced back at the screen. The man didn't move. He didn't react to the lights, to my presence, to anything. I felt a creeping dread. This wasn't just some drunk guest trying to scare someone. This was deliberate, calculated. I made the decision to go outside again. This time, I kept my distance, staying close to the office. I turned the flashlight on and aimed it at the figure. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating him in streaks. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. Then, suddenly, he vanished, just like that. One moment he was there, the next, nothing. I blinked in disbelief, scanning the area.
No footprints, no car, no sign he had even been standing there. My stomach dropped. That wasn't physically possible. I knew it. I immediately ran to room 9 and banged on the door. "Check your doors, lock everything," I shouted. The woman and her husband opened the door cautiously, their faces pale. "He's gone now, but he was right outside," she exclaimed, voice trembling. I escorted them back to the office, making sure all doors were locked behind us. I checked the security cameras again, cycling through every angle. Every monitor showed the empty lot. There was no sign of David Cole's truck, no figure lurking anywhere. It was as if he had never existed. The rest of the night passed in a blur. Every sound, every shadow made me jump. I didn't sleep at all. By the time dawn came, I was exhausted but still shaken. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the woman had hallucinated, or maybe someone was playing a prank. But I knew, deep down, it wasn't possible. He had been real. When morning finally arrived, the couple checked out without incident. I never saw them again. Later that day, I checked the registration forms. David Cole's check-in was legitimate. He had a room. He had paid in full. But the strange part, his room was room 12, not room 9. I confronted the manager that morning, recounting everything. He gave me a puzzled look and said, "There's no record of anyone outside room 9 last night, and the cameras didn't catch anything unusual. Are you sure you were dreaming?" I wanted to shout, to scream, to make him understand. But the reality was simple. The footage didn't lie. Nothing showed up on the cameras. Nothing. Yet I had seen him. I had seen him standing there, watching them, and then disappearing like a ghost. I left the motel that day with a sinking feeling. I knew I'd never truly forget that night. Months later, I heard that David Cole's name had come up in a series of minor crimes in another state, always involving late-night motel stops, but none of them ever matched the story I witnessed. Whoever or whatever stood outside that window wasn't just a man. There was something inhuman about the way he existed and vanished. I still think about that night sometimes, about the feeling of being watched, the impossible disappearance, and the quiet dread that settled over the motel like a living thing. I don't work at that motel anymore. I don't even go near isolated roads at night. But every time I hear about late-night motel guests or empty parking lots or the quiet hum of neon lights in the desert, I remember the man outside room 9. And I remember the way he watched, completely still, completely silent. Even now, I can feel it, the lingering thought that he could be anywhere, watching, waiting, and somehow I know he never really left. It was the spring of 2019 when I decided to head back home for a weekend. I was living in San Jose at the time, but my parents still lived out in Crescent City, a small town tucked away near the Northern California coast. The drive along Highway 101 was beautiful in the daylight, but at night it felt like driving into another world. Long stretches of winding road, almost no lights, and barely any other cars. I left my parents' place around 8 p.m., thinking I could make the drive back before sunrise. That was my first mistake. The first couple of hours were uneventful, the road narrowing into 2 lanes as I passed through the forested stretches north of the bay. Then, somewhere around Klamath, the fog started rolling in. At first, it was just a light mist, but within 5 minutes, visibility dropped to 20 feet. I slowed to 35 miles per hour, trying to stay alert, but the fog made it nearly impossible to see anything. I knew pulling over would have been the safe choice, but there were no safe spots on that stretch, and I wanted to push through. That's when I saw him, a man standing perfectly still on the right shoulder. At first, I thought he might need help or was waiting for a ride, but there were no other cars nearby, no broken down vehicle, nothing to explain his presence. I slowed as I passed, careful not to hit him, but he didn't react, didn't even glance at me. Something about the way he stood there, rigid, calm, almost deliberate, sent a shiver down my spine. I convinced myself it was just a coincidence, maybe a hiker or a local out for a late-night walk. But 10 minutes later, I saw him again, this time on the left side of the road. Everything else about him was identical. Tall, dark clothing, the same posture.
My heart rate jumped. How could he have moved ahead of me so quickly? I was the only car on this stretch of highway and there were no side roads. I even audibly said, "What the hell?" as I passed. And then, this time, he looked at me, directly at me. Eye contact that lasted a heartbeat but felt like eternity. I sped up slightly, though cautiously, because the fog made it impossible to go too fast. My mind raced with rational explanations. Maybe I had seen him twice and he was just moving around. Maybe someone was playing a sick joke, but it didn't make sense. A few minutes later, the headlights caught another figure, this one standing in the middle of the road. I had no choice but to stop. He was wearing a hood, face obscured, and still didn't move. Panic set in. I put the car in reverse to back up, but then I noticed movement behind me, another figure approaching. I screamed, slammed the car into drive, and swerved to the side, narrowly avoiding the first man. Suddenly, the back of my car jolted violently, a crunching sound, metal bending. But when I checked, there was no one there. No cars, no people, nothing. I realized whatever I had hit was some immovable object, a guardrail, a mile marker, something I hadn't noticed in the fog. I finally made it through the worst stretch and the fog thinned. My hands shook on the steering wheel, adrenaline coursing through me. By the time I reached a lit section of the highway, I thought I was safe, but the dent in my bumper proved otherwise. Whatever I had seen, whatever had chased me or appeared and disappeared, it was real enough to leave damage. The hallucination theory crumpled. There was something out there on that foggy stretch of road, something I couldn't explain. A few weeks later, back at school, I decided to go for a run. I had been trying to keep busy during spring break, staying away from bad habits and keeping my mind off the stress of classes. The route I chose was a loop through the small woods near my hometown. It was a path I knew by heart, every tree, every turn, every mile. I started at 5 p.m. The sun was still out, but a thick fog had rolled in, thicker than anything I'd seen in that area before. The first mile or so was normal. The trail was familiar, the soft dirt cushioning my steps. Then I reached the halfway point. Visibility was down to 15 feet. I relied on memory and instinct, but my watch kept ticking up, showing mileage that didn't match the trail. 2.5 miles in, I should have been approaching the exit, yet the trees still surrounded me. I paused, looking around, trying to orient myself, but there were no forks, no side paths. That's when I heard it, a low, droning sound, fluctuating in tone, like a human moan distorted into something unnatural. I glanced over my shoulder, nothing, just fog. My pace quickened, fear gripping me as I realized the sound was keeping pace with me. Faster, slower, swelling and dipping rhythmically. No one could match that timing unless they were deliberately following. Exhaustion began to set in, but fear pushed me forward. After what felt like an eternity, I broke through the woods, emerging onto the street near my home. I could see the fog thinning slightly, but my eyes immediately caught a dark silhouette just inside the edge of the trees. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall and unmoving, swaying gently back and forth. The droning had stopped, but the figure didn't move. My mind raced. Was it a man? Something else? I didn't wait to find out. I ran straight home, heart pounding, not daring to look back. Once inside, I collapsed, trying to convince myself it had been my imagination, but I knew better. That fog, that sound, that shape, they had been real. My parents suggested it was probably someone messing with me, a prank by a local, but I couldn't accept that. Nothing about it made sense. How could someone match my pace through the dense woods, remain unseen, and then appear as a silhouette at the edge of the path? The memory stayed with me for weeks. Every time I passed that trail, I felt eyes on me, a lingering sense that something was still out there, waiting. I never ran that loop at dusk or in fog again. And even now, I know that deep in those woods, something watches, something that moves with the fog, that drifts with the shadows, that I can't see, but I can feel. The days following that run were restless. I kept replaying the events in my mind, trying to rationalize what had happened, but nothing fit. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been actively watching me, studying me. I tried going about my routine, classes, homework, gym,
but the thought of that silhouette in the woods followed me everywhere. Each time I passed near that trail, my heart skipped. I started avoiding the area entirely, taking longer routes just to keep that loop out of sight. A week later, I was invited by my friend Marcus to go kayaking at Willow Bay, about an hour north of my campus. Marcus and I had been planning this trip for years, both of us avid kayakers. Willow Bay was known for its tidal estuary and wildlife, quiet and peaceful. I was hesitant at first, still shaken by the fog incident, but Marcus reassured me. "We'll be fine," he said. "We've done this plenty of times. I'll guide us." His confidence was contagious, so I agreed. We launched early Saturday morning. The fog had rolled in thick, the kind that made everything seem muffled and distant. Visibility was only around 40 feet, but we stayed close together, paddling slowly and checking bearings with a compass and GPS. For the first hour, it was serene. The only sounds were our paddles slicing through water and distant bird calls. I felt a sense of calm returning, though the dense fog still pressed on me like a reminder to stay alert. Then I heard it, a faint splashing, steady and deliberate. I glanced at Marcus. He hadn't made a sound. I stopped paddling, and so did he. The splashing continued, but it wasn't in rhythm with our paddles. It was consistent, almost mechanical. Rowing, not kayaking. My stomach sank. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Marcus nodded, tense, gripping his paddle tighter. We both scanned the fog, trying to locate the source, but saw nothing. Minutes passed and the sound didn't change. Not a single variation in speed or intensity. My chest tightened. Something was out there, moving with purpose. Marcus suggested maybe it was a fisherman, but the rhythm was too precise, too constant. Every now and then, the fog would thin slightly, and I caught a glimpse of a small wooden rowboat, barely visible. Someone was in it, moving silently, rowing without acknowledgement of our presence. My skin crawled. We decided to head for shore, navigating cautiously. The fog played tricks on our perception, shifting and swirling. Every time we changed direction, the rowing sound adjusted with us, always keeping pace. I could feel Marcus's unease beside me. His jaw was tight, eyes darting constantly. It wasn't threatening in a direct way, but the persistence of that presence made it unbearable. I felt trapped, small, and exposed on the open water, completely at the mercy of whatever or whoever was following. Eventually, the fog began to lift. For the first time, I could see beyond 100 feet. I glanced toward where the rowboat had been. Nothing. Open water. The sense of dread didn't vanish, though. Marcus and I scanned the bay, seeing no other kayakers, no boats, no sign of anyone at all. Yet the memory of the rhythmic splashing remained, echoing in my mind like a warning. We paddled to the landing spot, relieved to finally touch solid ground. I jumped out, knees weak, gasping for air. Marcus did the same, glancing nervously around. That's when I noticed them. Wet footprints leading out of the water. Barefoot. Fresh, dark depressions in the sand. They didn't stop at the shore. They continued along the tree line, heading toward the forest. My stomach churned. Whoever had been rowing had come ashore before us and moved through the woods, unseen. Curiosity gnawed at me. I wanted to see where the footprints came from, to find the rowboat, to confront whatever had been out there. Marcus, however, had already decided we're done. Don't look back, he said. His tone left no room for argument. Hesitant but unwilling to disobey, I followed him back to the kayaks. The footprints stretched behind us, disappearing into the shadows of the fog and trees, as if whatever had made them had vanished into thin air. We shoved the kayaks back into the water and paddled away as fast as we could. Every splash of the paddle felt deafening after the silence of the morning. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see movement in the fog, but there was nothing. The bay had returned to its calm, empty state, though I knew it was an illusion. Something was there. Something that could move silently, that could anticipate our every move, and that had no intention of being seen. Even now, years later, I still think about that morning. I replay it in my head, analyzing every detail, searching for a rational explanation, but nothing fits. A prank? Impossible. A hallucination? Not after the footprints. Natural sounds? The precision of the rowing rules that out. I still wonder about that small wooden boat, the figure that manned it, and the footprints that led into the forest. What I do know is this: there are places in the world where reality bends in subtle, terrifying ways, where the familiar becomes unfamiliar and the ordinary becomes impossible to explain. Willow Bay is one of those places, and even after all this time, I can't stop thinking about the silhouette and the fog, the droning sound, the footprints leading into the unknown. It's a reminder that some mysteries exist not to be solved, but to be felt and feared.